Since the Boko Haram insurgency began in the northeast region of the country, the population of people that have been rendered homeless has soared to well over 2 million. That number of Nigerians have had to live with the heartache of frustration and disappointment as they wake to uncertainty each day. Indeed, refugees and internally displaced persons are going through a tortuous time if the figures are anything to go by. As the world marks this year's Refugee Day, my guest on this week's episode of the program talks about the humanitarian situation in the Northeast. Hello there, thank you for joining me on the program this week. I'm Gloria Umezuki. 180,000 Nigerians flee their homes in Adamawa, Borno and Yobe states to Cameroon, Chad and Niger Republic in the face of the Boko Haram insurgency. Well, now that the military is recapturing their communities, most of them are making a return. Well, this has caused a humanitarian situation in the Northeast. I had a conversation with the UNHCR representative in Nigeria and ECOWAS on the refugee situation in Nigeria. But up ahead. To address the situation of refugees and internally displaced persons, the federal government plans to launch a strategic framework for intervention within the next 3 months. Take a listen.
According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, Nigeria has the third largest humanitarian crisis globally, as an estimated 2.1 million people were being rendered homeless in the northeast due to the Boko Haram insurgency. The 2017 World Refugee Day provides an opportunity for stakeholders to focus on coordinated efforts to strengthen the humanitarian environment in Nigeria.
The 20th June every year is an important commemoration and opportunity for recommitment of the human family to address the situation of people who are forced to flee their homes and sometimes countries to escape conflict, war, or persecution.
The internal displacement in Nigeria caused by a 6-year-old insurgency has resulted in over 2 million internally displaced persons and impacted on 26 million people living in the northeast part of the country. The situation has been worsened by an unprecedented influx of returning refugees from neighboring countries, especially Cameroon, according to the UNHCR. The agency said in May 2017 about 12,000 refugees returned to the border town of Banki in Borno State, which was already housing 45,000 displaced Nigerians. And recently, another 889 refugees, mostly children, arrived in Banki on June 17 from Cameroon. But government says there are plans to address the situation.
The National Commission for Refugees, Migrants and Internally Displaced Persons shall unveil a national integrated strategic framework for intervention for refugees, migrants and internally displaced persons in Nigeria within the next 3 months. Derived from the principles of the Kampala Convention, the framework would integrate appropriate interventions through effective utilization of data, research and planning for the return, resettlement, rehabilitation and reintegration of the persons concerned.
This framework will provide appropriate interventions through the effective utilization of data, research and planning for the return, resettlement, rehabilitation, and reintegration of all persons of concern. To deliver results, we must ensure humanity, neutrality, impartiality, independence, unity, and universality in our methodology.
Government is hoping that the framework, when launched sometime in September, will help refugees and internally displaced persons settle and integrate peacefully to their normal lives.
In our interview, I had a conversation with Mr. Antonio Kanyandula on the humanitarian situation in some of the refugee camps, as well as the rising cases of migration across the Mediterranean Sea. Mr. Antonio Kayandula, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Now, a large number of refugees came in from Cameroon, returning to the northeast, and this situation is what the UNHCR High Commissioner described as dangerous. Can you give us a feel of the situation exactly, the humanitarian situation there?
Well, yes, indeed. We have taken the government of Nigeria to talk to the refugees in Cameroon, precisely to tell them that, yes, indeed, the government is working to create the conditions for refugees to return, but that they should not precipitate themselves, because what we have in Banki is a situation of internal displacement. And already the internally displaced in Banki are living under very difficult conditions when it comes to even shelter, health, and water. But therefore, the return of these refugees, there were actually two major returns, shall we say three. One return, a forceful return of 2,000 refugees, that over which we made some noise to the government of Cameroon because it wasn't proper. A second return was more, it wasn't forced, it was organized, but it wasn't forceful return of more or less 12,000 refugees into a very small town, as I said, where the services are already overstretched, which actually forced the government of Nigeria to try and see whether they could decongest Banki itself. And then there is a third return of more or less 880 Nigerian refugees. Again, it placed quite a lot of stress on the services that already are very poor, in some cases even not available. Food was something that was urgently needed. I know that NEMA immediately ran to give them food, but not before 17 hours. I mean, keeping people 17 hours without food, it's a difficult situation. But we have tried to tell the refugees that where you're going in Nigeria, the conditions are not yet created for people to be received in dignity and safety.